Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Russia says a Ukrainian drone strike damaged a transformer at the Kursk nuclear power plant, starting a fire that was quickly put out with no casualties or radiation leaks reported. The incident came as Ukraine celebrates Independence Day, while the UN nuclear watchdog urged both sides to show restraint around atomic facilities. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker says President Trump's plan to deploy troops to Chicago is an abuse of power, arguing there is no emergency justifying the move. Trump has already sent 2,000 troops to Washington and says he will extend the policy to Chicago and New York as part of his crime crackdown. Local hospitals say Israeli strikes and gunfire killed at least 33 Palestinians in Gaza, many while sheltering or seeking food, as a UN-backed body confirmed famine in Gaza City. Israel's defense minister warned the city could be destroyed in a new operation, while aid groups blame war and food restrictions for starvation. Israel dismisses the famine report as a lie. Former Defense Minister Benny Gantz has called on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to form a unity government with opposition members to secure the release of hostages in Gaza. The move would sideline far-right coalition partners who oppose any deal with Hamas, even as Israel threatens to destroy Gaza City if hostages are not freed. After Trump's deployment of troops in the US Capitol, hundreds of National Guard were posted on the National Mall, posing for selfies and mingling with tourists, despite it being one of the safest parts of Washington. City leaders call it a show of force by President Trump, while some soldiers say they doubt they'll see any action. Taiwan is accusing Beijing of falsifying history by claiming communist forces led the fight against Japan in World War II, as tensions rise ahead of China's planned military parade. Veterans in Taipei, marking the war's 80th anniversary, say the nationalist government did most of the fighting, while Taiwan urges its citizens to boycott China's parade. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversaw tests of 2 new air defense missiles, which state media claimed had superior combat capability against targets like drones and cruise missiles. The launch came hours after South Korea fired warning shots at North Korean troops who briefly crossed the demilitarized zone amid joint US-South Korea military drills and a planned Trump-Lee summit in Washington. Syria's Electoral Commission says the country's first parliamentary vote under its new Islamist government will not be held in Saouida and 2 other provinces due to security concerns. The move follows deadly July clashes where hundreds were killed in fighting between Druze forces, Sunni Bedouin tribes and government troops. Now we start in Europe, where Russia has blamed Ukraine for a drone strike on the Kursk nuclear power plant, saying a transformer was damaged after the drone was shot down and detonated. Officials said a fire was quickly put out. However, no casualties were reported and radiation levels remain normal. The United Nations' nuclear watchdog has repeatedly warned both sides to show maximum restraint around such facilities. However, Ukraine has not commented on the allegation. The accusation comes as Ukraine marks its Independence Day with celebrations in Kiev and support from allies. The drone attack on the Russian nuclear plant also coincides with Britain announcing it will keep training Ukrainian troops until at least 2026, extending Operation Interflex. At the same time, Moscow claimed its forces had seized 2 villages in Donetsk, part of a slow and costly advance. We're now joined by Mark Sutherland, who's a geopolitical commentator, and he joins us live from London. Mark, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. First of all, I want to get your thoughts, your analysis on these allegations from Russia that Ukraine targeted a Russian power plant in the Russian Kursk region, and the dangers that could bring to not just that particular region, but the whole of Europe.
Good morning, Thomas. Good to see you. Deeply, deeply concerning. We remember the American meltdown of 3 Mile Island. And we also have in our memory, some of us are old enough, of course, Chernobyl. It goes without saying, it may seem a very, very stupid comment, but if people are then fighting and have ammunitions firing around nuclear plants, this is beyond concerning. The other thing is that since the Russian invasion in February 2022, I think in the Zaporizhzhia area, I do apologize if I'm not getting that pronunciation right. The key thing is the biggest European nuclear plant. There's a number of nuclear plants there in that area, and that plant has just kept going in regard to cooling. The accusations, I think there's going to be more, excuse the pun, fallout from that, as whether that is true, whether to be denied. But the Atomic Agency, this is concerning, of course. And in some ways it seems a bit ironic when you're saying, could you please fight this battle, but be very careful of this atomic plant, because we all want this war to end, Thomas. I know I sound like a sort of continuing banging drum, but we do want this war to end. How that we end it is another matter, Thomas.
Yes, indeed, Mark. Also, your analysis on the UK's announcement that they are going to continue Operation Interflex in training Ukrainian troops into 2026. What does this signal about the UK government's commitment to Ukraine?
Well, within the UK government's commitment of having already given billions of British pounds to that theatre of war, and then rather recently then signing a deal to say, we're going to be supporting Ukraine for 100 years. It seems that this commitment, as they are saying, is then real, no matter what it then does to the economy of the UK. And I will say this. We had a number of years of complete inaction under the Biden administration. We remember what sort of action have we had from European leaders to try and end this. So with the situation that happened in Alaska, where you had that summit, the fact that the Trump administration trying to then reach out and get people around the table, this is what we want to see. But in regard to the UK commitment, of course, verbally they're saying we will then continue this. And many of us, concern is, what is this infinitum, when there are huge concerns within the UK economy and huge concerns within the UK that the Prime Minister of the UK needs to be addressing. Thomas.
Yes, Mark, thank you very much for giving your insight. Do stay with us. Here on NewsX World, we will, of course, continue to bring you all updates coming out of the conflict in Europe. We now move over to the United States for our next update, where the Democratic governor of the U.S. state of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, has said that President Donald Trump's plan to deploy troops to Chicago is an abuse of power. He also said that there is no emergency that justifies the National Guard being sent to Illinois, and the US president is attempting to manufacture a crisis. Adding on, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson said that the city government has grave concerns about any deployment of troops, labeling the president's approach as uncoordinated, uncalled for, and unsound. He also said that the unlawful deployment, quote, could inflame tensions between residents and law enforcement and threaten the progress that the city has made in reducing crime. Meanwhile, Trump has already deployed around 2,000 troops to Washington, D.C., where the local government is controlled by Democrats as part of his crackdown on crime in U.S. cities. Trump said that he would implement the policy in Chicago and also in New York City. We're once again joined by Mark Sutherland. Mark, there does seem to be a pattern here. Donald Trump has said that there is a crime problem in these cities. That may be true for some of them. However, in Washington, we have seen that he has deployed these troops to that of the National Mall next to famous monuments where places seem to be relatively safe. All of the cities that he has deployed these troops, they are Democrat-led cities. Is this an abuse of power by Donald Trump, as J.B. Pritzker, the Illinois governor, seems to put it?
Very interesting when you look at Chicago, Thomas, if you look at the history of Chicago, in the past it used to be called Chirac for the amount of the murder rate that would go on in Chicago. Chicago has a very, very interesting history in regard to left-wing politics and the influence of that on the rest of the United States. Many people have been concerned about some of the awful crime in regard to the murder rate. There's been some appalling incidents when you would then have houses, machine guns, and children thrown into baths just to make sure that they're kept alive within these kind of incidences. I'm not exaggerating if people go through the history. And what you're alluding to, I understand that, and we've discussed this, you and I, in regard to the fact that is it an overreaction in Washington, D.C., because the crime rate, it may be not as high as people perceive. It's about actually saying to the Democrats, and we go back to the BLM riots in the first administration, this whole thing of pushing when you're going to defund the police and actually lowering the morale of police forces within America, within democratic cities. And remember with what we've then recently seen in California as well. It's all part of that ethos that says, no, I am not happy with this. We have to then deal with this. Then, as you quite rightly say, it's this whole thing of the deployment of the National Guard, and people need to ask themselves and say, well, what do the police forces need on the ground? Are they being actually properly equipped by the Democratic mayors, et cetera, to do the job that needs to be done in the eyes of President Trump? And then they would turn around and say, well, maybe you're holding back funding. So it's a real tit for tat politically, but unfortunately, there is huge crime in Chicago, and sadly, people get killed. Thomas.
Of course, Mark. However, I just want to highlight the statistics. Compared to last year, I mean, Mark, Washington D.C. we have a decline 27% in homicides compared to last year from Washington D.C. and a decline in 31% in Chicago. These aren't mere numbers. These are pretty significant declines in homicides from both cities, and now we're yet to get further information about the New York deployment of the National Guard. However, what we do know is there is certainly fear from Donald Trump that a new mayor or candidate, there's a possibility of him coming in, Zoran Mamdani, who Donald Trump has been very much vocal about, and he is an anti-Trump candidate. This can be seen as very much political. There certainly is there not a danger here, Mark, of certainly signs of authoritarianism here?
You can easily argue that. I take your point very much so. But there's also this whole thing of I will not tolerate crime, and that the American people, when they voted him in, asked him to then deal with it. And as I have discussed with you in the past, it's a relationship where the ex-New York Mayor Giuliani is a very dear friend of his. And when the New York crime rate was sorted out, it was then, when you saw a smashed window, it was immediately repairing that, and etc. And yes, you're quite right to point out those statistics, the fact that we're even sadly discussing the murder rate has gone down, but the murder rate is still unacceptable, and we could apply that to many countries across the world. But that is because within the is something very difficult for some of us to understand, the whole ethos of the right to bear arms. But Chicago has had this crime problem in regard to the murder rate for a long time. But if the figures are coming down, that's good. But let's get those figures down to absolute zero, and for the democratic mayors, democratic authorities to make that a priority instead of making it a political football. But I hear the arguments when people are throwing the figures at each other. But let's deal with the issue, and let's deal with the crime that's on the ground, is what I believe that people of the United States are actually asking for in this situation, and in a number of other cities. They've still got the memory of the riots over BLM. Recently, with what's happening in California in regard to the ICE agents and the crackdown on illegal immigration, they are all part of why people voted for President Trump. Thomas.
Mark, pleasure having you on the program as always. Always look forward to our discussions. We now move over to the Indo-Pacific for our next update. Why Taiwan and China are locked in a war of words over World War II history as Beijing prepares a mass military parade to mark Japan's surrender. Taiwan, officially the Republic of China, says its forces led the war against Japan, with veterans and officials accusing the Chinese Communist Party of distorting history. Veteran Pan Cheng-fa, 99, recalled fighting the Japanese and said communist forces prioritized strengthening themselves over resistance. In Taipei, anniversary events honored Republican soldiers and the Flying Tigers, while President Lai Ching-te warned against Beijing's aggression and urged citizens to boycott China's parade. China, however, asserts the Communist Party was the backbone of resistance and claims Taiwan as its territory, a claim firmly rejected by Taipei. We are now joined by William Yang. He's a China analyst and he joins us live from Taipei. William, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. What's the messaging around this, William? Could you tell us a little bit about how China analyzes its history, how it educates its youth in regards to the history of how the Chinese Communist Party conducted itself in world wars, etc. How does it put itself forward to its youth and itself on the world stage?
So I think one of the most important things surrounding this battle of narrative between Taipei and Beijing from China's perspective is that they need to be able to control who in fact represents the legitimate government, and also the legitimate leader holds the legitimate power of the entire so-called Chinese nation. And in their view, even though during the World War II, it was indeed the Republic of China government in power at the time, they don't want the Chinese public to have this contradicting and conflicting views of history. So what they are trying to do is to make sure that they emphasize the role and the function that the Communist Party played during that war, and then basically inherit the overall entire ultimate victory as the contribution and the result of the Communist Party's leadership. And in this process, what they are hoping to achieve is to assert and double down on this notion that there is only one China, and the People's Republic of China is the only sole representative. And in this whole process, to double down on the notion that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, so that there is not going to be this contradicting narrative where another country or another representative of this notion of China is also claiming its role and its function in the World War II history.
Yes, indeed, William. And also, does this What time does this come amidst? I mean, we obviously do see tensions rising between the two. What can we expect from this parade? What kind of narrative are China pushing? And what's the feeling in Taiwan today?
So I think from the parade on September 3rd, we are definitely going to expect a big celebratory mood with a display of China's military might and power. And we already know from media reports last week that there will be a showcase of some of China's most advanced military missiles and also weapon systems that will be on display. These, I think, all feed into China's intent to try to present itself as a rising military power that not only has always been on the side of justice, kind of tying it back to the history of the World War II as China being this country that prevailed against an invader of Japan in this particular case. And they are trying to use that narrative to tie it back to the fact that China is now this powerful country, rising military power that continues to uphold what, in their view, a global justice. And it is definitely going to try to use this chance to highlight that part, but also at the same time try to, you know, promote their legal war battle, the lawfare battle against Taiwan, to try to minimize Taiwan's existence and try to double down on the narrative that Taiwan has always been a part of China and Taiwan is not a separate political entity. And so the mood in Taipei, I think, is that people here are already very used to China's lawfare activities and strategies against Taiwan. But at the same time, the government here will definitely try to use these occasions to promote its own narrative so that it at least has a countermeasure that can push back against the Chinese narrative so that it doesn't let the Chinese narrative to dominate the international impression and understanding about the complicated relationship between China and Taiwan.
William Yang, always a pleasure to get your insight on these topics. Thank you very much for joining us. We now move over, but stay in the Indo-Pacific, where North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has overseen the test firing of 2 new air defense missiles. This is what state media has reported today from the country. It said the launches were held Saturday and they showed superior combat capability and a fast response against targets like drones and cruise missiles, though few technical details were released. The test comes as South Korea and the United States hold their annual joint drills. Just days earlier, Seoul's military fired warning shots after about 30 North Korean troops crossed the demilitarized zone. Pyongyang called the incident a deliberate provocation and warned of controllable escalation at the border. Kim has repeatedly denounced the US-South Korean exercises as hostile, vowing to speed up his country's nuclear buildup. South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, who is due to meet US President Donald Trump on Monday, has sought warmer ties, but Pyongyang has rejected any move to improve relations. We're now joined by Dr. Sanjay Kumar. He is a journalist from the Korea Herald, and he joins us live from the South Korean capital. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar, for joining us. The current feeling in South Koreans about, of course, the threat coming from the north and their possible new and improved military capabilities?
For South Koreans, it is a multi-purpose tool being used by North Korea since many years. This testing of missiles is not a new thing. The South Korean people as well as the military here are very used to it. But this time, the timing once again has to be noted very well, because just yesterday there was a joint statement from President Lee Jae-myung of South Korea and Japanese Prime Minister yesterday. So this is coming at a very crucial moment, because yesterday both the leaders of Japan and Korea have vote to achieve denuclearization of the North Korea. So that is also has sent a signal to North Korea, and I think they want to uh, get the attention internationally as well as domestically. And it is also very crucial here right now because tomorrow on Monday, President Lee Jae-myung and US President Trump is also going to have a summit meeting. So the timing is very crucial. And as all of us know that the joint drills of US ROK had been ongoing. It is ongoing on the sidelines of the Ulchi freedom. And this is also is a kind of offending to the North. And it is not a new thing. Whenever such things happen, they do test these kind of missiles. Like last year in April also, they tested Pyolchi. Then this year, March also, they tested. But what is very concerning for many here is that if you see the KCNA news agency's statement, they say that the new one, I mean, the new test has very unique features and it has a unique technology. So there are concerns here that there may be a possibility of Russian technology or like more advanced technology being transferred, and North Korean air defense system was not seen very competent, and it was not seen. It was seen as a very vulnerable kind of technology. So there is a great concern that Russian technology might have been used. There are like analysis coming on. And this is very practical to understand as well, because in the last couple of months, if you see the air defense system being used on the warfare, if you see like US precision strike in Iran, or you see Russia-Ukraine war, also the use of drones. So these air defense systems are becoming a very common thing for the warfare. So maybe North Korea has taken a lesson, and they are trying to come up with something very updated. I mean something very unique and updated technology, which is being validated in their statement too.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. Always a pleasure to speak to you here on NewsX World. We now move over to South Asia, where India will temporarily halt most postal deliveries to the United States from Monday, citing confusion over new tariff rules set to take effect from August the 29th. Only letters, documents and gifts under $100 will be accepted, with European postal services also announcing suspensions. The move comes as President Donald Trump threatens to double duties on Indian imports to 50% over Russian oil purchases, sparking fears of job losses and slower growth. New Delhi has called the measures unfair and is pushing tax cuts, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi proposing simplified GST rates of 5% and 18% to boost demand. Economists say the reform could ease the impact of tariffs and win public support, though it may strain finances. With trade talks stalled and oil imports under scrutiny, India's growth could fall below 6% this year if no deal is reached. We're now joined by Dr. Ajay Dua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Dr. Dua, for joining us here on the program. I want to get your analysis of Narendra Modi's response to the substantial 50% tariffs that Donald Trump has placed on India. Was that the right thing to do, the GST response?
Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. I happen to have heard the Prime Minister of India in a public speech last evening, where there was something called the Global Leaders Forum organized by a newspaper in India, and I happened to be there. The Indian Prime Minister did not seem upset at all with what's happening. He seemed more concerned with how to navigate the situation and was rather upbeat about the future of the Indian economy. And he laid a lot of emphasis on the economic reforms, as second-generation economic reforms, as he called them, which he's launched, starting with the rationalization of the goods and service tax. That means the indirect tax regime in India. This is a tax which was brought in only in 2017 by amalgamating certain federal and the state taxes, and with collection, 1 point collection. Yes, 8 years of implementing it have shown that the Indian economies, the income from this tax, or the revenue from this tax is much higher than what the individuals were collecting earlier. So that's viewed the Prime Minister and the Indian establishment to effect a reduction in the tax rates, as well as reduce the 4 slabs into 2, integrate them into 2, but both at a lower level. This is going to affect the revenue of the center as well as the states, but the Prime Minister seemed to be, and I think rightly, be looking at the higher revenues, the higher positive impact on the economy, which will more than make up for the reduction in rates and the rationalization of the slabs.
Yes, Dr. Ajay Jua. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us on that situation. We will continue here on NewsX World to bring you more updates from around the world. For now, thank you for joining us.